God.
Those savages are threatening our whole operation.
See, I'm something of a
big fucking hearted hero. Little fight meal. I like that.
You in my house, motherfucker!
You've called out the thunder. Now, get ready for the boom!
What's up, savages? As always, I am E. Middle. Bart's not able to join us again this week. He's dealing with some medical issues. But this is the Savage MMA Show, the show that takes other MMA podcasts to the deep water. Thanks for joining us again for another week. Our numbers are continuing to grow, so keep spreading the word and doing your part. We're very grateful for it. A lot of action to cover this week as we had both Bellator and UFC cards. So as always, we'll just jump straight into the Bellator card and cover the action from there. And man, let me tell you, Bellator is really starting to flex its muscles. This is the second straight Bellator card that delivered huge action that was just as comparable to what the UFC was putting on, even though the UFC was a pay-per-view event this week. Given the options to pay $60 for that UFC card and watch Bellator on free TV, I mean, it's hard not to take Bellator at this point because their fighters are almost on the level with UFC, even with their homegrown talent really starting to come through. So the card kicked off with Adam Piccolotti versus Carrington Banks, undefeated Carrington Banks. And man, was I wrong on this one. I thought Carrington Banks would get it done going to the decision, but Piccolotti put on an absolute show. He completely dominated Carrington Banks through the whole thing. Wore him down, and finally ended it by a rear naked choke with only like 20 seconds left in the fight. So Piccolotti had been undefeated, had a good undefeated streak, and then he'd dropped a couple fights when his level of competition got on the rise. So he rebounds here with a win over Carrington Banks. So it looks like he may start to make a push back up into title contention. We'll see if Carrington Banks can rebound from this loss. Coming up after that, certified savage Aaron Pico goes up against Lee Morrison, and Aaron Pico with another deadly body shot, just completely wrecks Lee Morrison, sends him rolling over backwards. One thing's for sure, Aaron Pico's the real deal, and it's time to get him some competition deserving of his status. It's time to start seeing him climb that ladder towards a title fight. So, going forward in this fight, it's time. Give Aaron Pico some real competition. The next fight up was a heavyweight matchup between MMA legend Chet Congo and Javi Ayala. Damn, I picked another one wrong this week. Chet Congo just delivers a straight KO on Javi Ayala about halfway through the first round. And, man, that's surprising. We've not seen Chet Congo finish a fight in some time. The guy's 40, I forget how old, 46 years old or something. He's an old dude. And Javi Ayala had looked pretty good coming into that fight, but it was a one-hitter quitter for Chet Congo. Good night, Javi Ayala. Chet Congo, after the fight, says he's going to continue fighting. So we'll see where that lands us, but the fight after that was John Fitch versus Paul Daly. Now, John Fitch, a guy we hadn't seen in a long time. We know versus an explosive striker like Paul Daly, he's going to try to take you to the ground and keep you there, and he did. He kept Paul Daly on the ground, wouldn't let him up. Paul Daly couldn't get back up. At the end of the first round, Paul Daly had a big flurry that looked like he was going to put the end to Fitch, and was probably enough in my eyes for him to win that first round. But after that, it was straight back to the ground for John Fitch, immediately going for a takedown in both the opening of the second and third round, and pretty much just keeping the fight there. Towards the end of the fight, I don't know, a minute and a half or so left, Daly works his way over towards the camera and just lets go with an embarrassing display of sportsmanship. Talking to the camera, saying this shit's not winning over any fans. He's not even hurting me. Let me up. Apparently, Paul Daly doesn't know how MMA works. And John Fitch was doing what John Fitch needed to do to win the fight. If Paul Daly wanted to get back to the feet and strike, Paul Daly needed to get back up, and he couldn't do it. So fuck Paul Daly for putting on just an embarrassing display there. I don't think I can be a fan of Paul Daly going forwards after that. John Fitch victorious in his debut in Bellator, so we'll see what happens when he comes back. Main event of the night. Ryan Bader versus King Mo Muhammad Law in the last first round matchup of the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix. One of the fastest finishes in the history of Bellator. Ryan Bader hits Mo Law, connects right on a sweet spot in the jaw, takes him down, jumps on top, finishes him with hammer fist real quick, 15 seconds into the first round. Ryan Bader, said it last week, Ryan Bader is the favorite to win this tournament and be a simultaneous two-division champion in Bellator. His only real contest, I'm thinking, is going to be next fight against Matt Mitrione. As the other side, Chael Sonnen versus Fedor. Who knows what's going to happen there, but I don't think either one of those guys has what it takes to beat a guy like Ryan Bader, who's absolutely at the top of his game right now. This is a Ryan Bader that we haven't seen, the way he's competing right now. We haven't seen this out of Ryan Bader before. He's at the best spot in his career. Matt Mitrione, the same can be said for him, though. So, Matt Mitrione versus Ryan Bader in the next round of the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix should be a fight that is a real chance for Bellator to display the talent that they've got and that they can put on a great card. So that wraps up Bellator 199. There's no Bellator this week. Bellator 200 coming back soon with the London card with Linton Vassell versus Phil Davis, who we talked about earlier. We got Roy Nelson on that card. We got Gegard Mousasi fighting for the title on that card. We've got Michael Venom Page versus Rickles on that card. That card is absolutely stacked. Roy Nelson versus Mirko Cro Cop. So, can't wait to see that upcoming. Let's jump over to UFC action. UFC 224, Nunes versus Pennington. The opening bout on the main card, Lyoto Machida versus Vitor Belfort, two legendary Brazilian fighters. Vitor Belfort, many thought this would be his last fight. Lyoto Machida in the second round delivers a head kick with the rear leg straight to the head of Vitor Belfort. Doesn't have to deliver any follow-up strikes. Vitor's out. Lyoto Machida wins. And yet again, another fighter has called out Michael Bisping. I think we're on page 2 or 3 of call-outs of Michael Bisping for his retirement fight at this point. But that fight's not going to make sense for Bisping to fight Lyoto Machida. It's just not going to happen. After the fight, like many had predicted, Vitor gets on the microphone, thanks all the fans, drops his gloves in the ring, and walks away from the sport of MMA as an all-time legend. Props to Vitor Belfort on his careers. He's truly one of the all-time greats. We've seen two big runs out of Vitor. This last, when Vitor got the testosterone replacement therapy, he went back to old Vitor, and he was an absolute monster until they took that away from him. I think we need to do something about that. When these guys get older, a lot of people think it's cheating, but I don't know. If their testosterone ranks low, there needs to be some type of threshold test where we put it that it's okay for a guy to do that. Because a guy like Vitor, man, he was fun to watch. He was an absolute monster. He gained some youth back, and I don't really have a problem with that. So, but Lyoto Machida is looking like he may be a contender again in the middleweight division, looking for another push. So it'll be interesting going forward to see the type of guy that they actually are going to match him up with. Is Michael Bisping is just not going to happen. Next fight, John Hands of Stone Lineker versus Brian Kelleher. And man, John Lineker put on an absolute show in this one, beating down Brian Kelleher for 3 rounds. After the first 2, it kind of looked like Kelleher was just going to take the damage. But Lineker finally finishes him off. Had a couple knockdowns. And Lineker was just wrecking Kelleher with body shots. And those body shots just were hurting Kelleher. You could see him trying to cover the body, which ended up ultimately leaving his head open, where Lineker finished him off with a KO. But John Lineker in that division has so much more power than guys that we're used to seeing. And he's got to be pushing back towards the top, up on TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt. We saw him fight TJ Dillashaw for the title before. And Dillashaw broke Lineker's jaw, which landed him out for a while. But since the comeback from that, Lineker has shown that he's back on the path that to get back to the title. So we'll see how far up they push him with Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw fighting again coming up. I think it's more likely if Garbrandt wins that we get Garbrandt versus Lineker. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens from there. The next fight on the card is Mackenzie Dern versus Amanda Cooper. And man, Mackenzie Dern missed weight by 7 pounds. Are you kidding me? That's just ridiculous. She says it's due to a change in camp. That's just due to undiscipline. I mean, come on, Mackenzie Dern. 7 pounds? 7 pounds. That's not like you barely missed it. You completely blew it out of the water. Colby Covington killing her with his Instagram pic of her morphing into Miss Piggy. Check that out if you haven't seen it. That shit was hilarious. Seen a couple other fighters calling that Mackenzie Dern's nickname should be Big Mac. I can't disagree there because she didn't even look good in this fight. I mean, she won the fight, but body-wise, she looked like a heifer coming up into this fucking thing. And I don't know, Mackenzie Dern lands a knockout on Amanda Cooper, knocks her down with a big wild overhand punch and then submits her. But it's the same Mackenzie Dern we saw in the last fight. She's throwing wild overhands, ducking her head down. When she faces anyone in this division, in the top 10, top 15, these people are just going to wait for her to throw that wild overhand where she ducks her head, and they're going to hit her with a counterpunch, and they're going to knock her out. She still doesn't have the skills that it takes. I'm off the Mackenzie Dern hype train. She's no longer Mackenzie the dime piece. That's for fucking sure. Unless you're talking about a dime piece of chicken nuggets that she was eating. So, Mackenzie Dern wins over Amanda Cooper. But it's a nice win in the first round, but I still don't think it was Mackenzie Dern has shown us anything to make us think that she is the real deal. And she's already talking about slowing down her training. See you later, Mackenzie. On to Jacare versus Kelvin Gastelum. And this was definitely the fight of the night. There's no doubt about that. Goes all 3 rounds. Kelvin Gastelum gets a surprising decision in Brazil. Personally, I scored the fight a draw. Don't have a problem with either one of these guys winning the fight, as it was that close. And really, Kelvin Gastelum should, after winning this fight, he's got to be the next man up to fight for the middleweight title after Robert Whittaker and Yoel Romero throw down at the next UFC card. But the most surprising thing about this is when it goes to the judges' cards, usually you can guarantee that the Brazilian guy is going to win in Brazil. I thought for sure Jacare was going to win, and they held Kelvin Gastelum's hand up, so props to Kelvin Gastelum there. Absolute thriller of a fight, and I would have liked to have seen that one go 2 more rounds myself. That would be an interesting thing. if a fight ends in a draw, give the guys the opportunity to continue fighting. That would be an interesting change. But either way, I think Gastelum deserved the win. Jacare deserved the win. I just don't think that the draw is properly utilized by the judges. There's a lot of judges that seem to feel like somebody has to win the fight, and I don't really always agree with that. I think the call in a fight that close is to call it a draw, let both guys get their win bonus, run it back again, because that's obviously a rematch people should like to see, because that was a hell of a fight. So we move on to the main event. Amanda Nunes versus Raquel Pennington. And Nunes put on an absolute showcase once again, showing that she is the cream of the crop in this division, in the women's bantamweight division. I actually scored the second round to Raquel Pennington. Striking was close, and she did have a takedown and kept it there for a while. But other than that, it was absolute domination by Amanda Nunes. And obviously the thing everyone's going to be talking about, has been talking about, you've heard different takes on it already, I'm sure, is after the fourth round, Raquel Pennington's nose was broken. She goes to her corner and she says, "I'm done." She says, "I'm done. I want to be done." And her corner doesn't accept that, and they send her back out, where her nose eventually just gets wrecked, and there's blood everywhere. I mean, it looked like somebody cut open a bag of blood from the hospital and dumped it on the mat. Her face was wrecked. A lot of people are, going after her corner, and initially, when I was watching the fight, I didn't really understand why they sent her back out. And she got wrecked like that. So a lot of people are after her corner for not protecting their fighter. But after stepping back and taking a look at this, I've got a different take on this. So Raquel Pennington was losing the fight, and she was taking damage, but it wasn't like she looked like she was in threat of being hurt at any point. I'm going to guess her corner didn't know how bad her nose was. So when your fighter comes over and she's not already a bloody mess, I mean, her nose was bleeding a little bit, but it wasn't anything to indicate that it was completely wrecked. When she comes over and says, I'm done, my initial reaction, if I'm in the corner, is probably that she's tired. This is a 5-round fight. She's been losing for 4 rounds. She's taking a lot of damage. I don't think, probably at that point, if I'm in her corner, I don't think she's in fear of being, I don't think she's wanting to quit due to the fact that she's injured, because she didn't really do, honestly, a good job of conveying that she was injured, if that's what it was. She came out and defended her corner, and I'm kind of going to lean the same way here and say that if she wanted to quit the fight because she was injured and she really knew that her nose was wrecked, she should have conveyed that better, saying, "My nose is broken. I'm done. I can't continue. It's broken." Instead, it was more of an "I'm done," which would indicate in most times that I'm losing this fight, I'm tired, I don't want to keep fighting. Either way, her head's not going to be in it going back into the 5th round. But if she really wanted to end the fight, all she had to do was turn to the judge, or not the judge, but turn to the referee and tell the referee, "I'm done," and the fight would have been over. She didn't do that. She continued to fight, so I'm going to take the side of her corner on this one. After the fight was over, great display of sportsmanship by Nunes. Her and Pennington and Pennington's fiance Tisha Torres are obviously all good friends. Nice display by Pennington, even after being beat up the way she was, to stand there in the center of the octagon with Amanda Nunes and display great sportsmanship and friendship. So going forwards from this, there's only one fight that makes sense, and that's Amanda Nunes versus Chris Cyborg. Both these girls have shown absolute domination of the division in a way that they're not going to be able to be beaten by anyone in their division. The only real contender for Amanda Nunes is Ketlin Vieira, and we talked about that after Ketlin's last fight. That the only person really left for her to fight is Amanda Nunes. So we'll see what happens here. We've already seen before Cyborg say that she's open to the fight with Nunes. We thought Nunes would do the same, but who knows? So we'll see what happens going forward with that. But Nunes versus Cyborg is probably the best option to make. So before we jump into previewing UFC Fight Night Chile, let's go over some news. Yair Rodriguez has... Dana White says Yair's been cut from the UFC for not being willing to take the fight with Zabit. If this is true, then that's just Dana White driving another nail into the UFC coffin, in my opinion, because there's no doubt that if you cut Yair Rodriguez, he's going to Bellator. And that's just going to add another name to the Bellator card, and Bellator's already gaining views on you in free TV versus free TV. Bellator's gaining on you. So, if this is true, it just makes Dana White look like an even bigger idiot, and you can guarantee that Bellator is going to scoop him up. I just don't know what's in Dana White's head. I don't know how Dana White is still in control of the UFC at this point. After the ownership change, I'm not sure how he has been retained. So it's time to let him go, not Yair. Dana's the one that needs to go. Nate Diaz, we talked about last week. Dana White, another story of Dana White, throwing out speculation of a fight between Nate Diaz and GSP. Well, if you listen to Nate Diaz, this is another complete bullshit statement by Dana White. Says they've never talked about this fight, that he will never fight GSP. GSP is a cheater. GSP cheated when he fought his brother, and Nate Diaz will not fight him. Once again, what is Dana White doing here? Is he throwing out these fights to put pressure on the fighters to accept them because the public wants to see him? I don't know. But Nate Diaz, the public wants to see him fight anybody. It doesn't have to be GSP. Tyron Woodley's called for this fight plenty of times. He's called for a GSP fight. And Dana doesn't like Tyron Woodley, apparently. So he's going to rob us of the opportunity to see that. Fuck Dana White. For the 100th time we've said it on this podcast. It's time for him to go. Some more UFC news. UFC has booked its first event in Russia. It's a UFC Fight Night in Moscow, September the 15th. I don't know if we'll see Khabib on this card or not. He said, around November is when he was looking to fight. And I don't know if they would waste him on a Fight Night card as opposed to a pay-per-view, because Khabib is one of their bigger draws, and big draws are few and far between in the UFC these days. Other than that, Stipe versus DC main event, I don't know what else you could have that's going to pull the numbers like that, other than Khabib versus probably Conor, because that's how Dana White rolls. But it should be Tony, as we've seen Tony Ferguson come back this week and say he's going to be ready probably in November, that he's the real champion. That they still haven't actually sent word to his people that he's been stripped of that title. So we'll see what happens there. Zabit most likely going to be on this card as well. I wouldn't be surprised to see Alexander Volkov on that card. But UFC is going to Moscow for their first ever Russia event, September 15th Fight Night. Chuck Liddell is coming back to MMA. We talked about it last week with him signing on with Oscar De La Hoya's Golden Boy Promotions. Wants to fight Tito Ortiz again, but he's come out even farther this week, saying after 2 fights he wants to fight Tito. Then he wants another fight against a more relevant current guy. And then he wants John Jones. I don't know why Chuck Liddell wants John Jones. John Jones said, "I'll fly you out to Albuquerque. We'll do it this weekend." Obviously, I don't think Chuck Liddell has anything for John Jones at this point. But love the enthusiasm by Chuck. Can't wait to see Chuck Liddell back in the octagon. So this Saturday we've got on FS1, we've got UFC Fight Night. It's Damian Maia versus Kamaru Usman. Coming to you live from Chile. This is the fight that was supposed to be Ponzinibbio versus Usman. Ponzinibbio injured. Damian Maia jumps in to save the card. So the first fight on the main card here is going to be Vicente Luque versus Chad Laprise. And this is an interesting fight. Laprise is on a bit of a winning streak. He's a really good striker. Coming off of a win versus Buffalo and Kamazi Gold, he's on a 3-fight win streak. And Luque, 12-6-1 record. Luque is actually a more efficient striker than Laprise. Laprise doesn't defend that well. And Luque is way better on the ground than Laprise, so I'm going to assume that Luque is going to look to take this fight to the ground. And when he does it, Laprise is not going to be able to stop him. I'm going to take Luque over Chad Laprise in this fight. Next fight, Veronica Macedo versus Andrea KGB Lee. If you haven't heard of Andrea Lee, she's a highly touted prospect coming into the UFC. She's a multiple-time Muay Thai and kickboxing champion. 8-2 in MMA. She actually does even have a couple submission wins, I believe. So she's fighting Veronica Macedo. Don't really know much about her. Her first UFC fight, she got KO'd by Ashley Evans Smith. And in this fight, I don't look to go any better for her, as I'm going to pick Andrea Lee over Veronica Macedo. The next fight up on this card, Diego Rivas versus Guido Canetta. What a fucking name, this dude, Guido Canetta. He's 1-2 so far in the UFC. He's a guy that's going to probably look to mostly take you down onto the ground and see what he can do with you from there. Diego Rivas fighting at home here in Chile, 2-1 in the 2-1 in the UFC. Is a pretty well rounded fighter. Fighting at home with the crowd behind him, I'm going to take Diego Rivas over Guido Canetti. Up next, Jared Cannonier, the Killer Gorilla, vicious knockout artist, going up against Dominic Reyes, who is undefeated, 8-0. And this is a fight that I would look to steal the thunder in this one, possibly take fight of the night. It's a fight of the night candidate for sure. Dominic Reyes, a very well-rounded guy. Jared Cannonier, a vicious knockout artist. The only two fights he's lost at light heavyweight are both to top 10 ranked guys, Glover Teixeira and John Blachowicz. He's not much of a ground guy, so if he's going to win by KO. And Dominic Reyes, if he wins, most likely I'm going to see him taking it to the ground. But the last couple times I've seen Jared Cannonier fight, he's looked really good. He's vicious. The savage inside of me can't turn down a knockout by Jared Cannonier. So we're going to take him to take Dominic Reyes' undefeated status away. Next matchup, Alexa Grasso versus undefeated Tatiana Suarez. Grasso, dubbed as the next big prospect to come up in the women's strawweight division. She's a great striker. Tatiana Suarez has came out of nowhere. She's undefeated. She's won her last couple fights. Amanda Cooper, that just fought Mackenzie Dern, she had a performance of the night against her. Grasso, we've seen, is an excellent striker. Suarez's takedowns are brilliant. She's 87% takedown efficiency. And Alexa Grasso is a pure striker. So I'm going to call Suarez to go to 7-0 in this one over Alexa Grasso. I think she's going to take her down. And I think she's going to be able to keep her there. The only chance Grasso really has in this one is to win the fight via striking. She has quick hands and she hits a lot, but she's not shown a lot of knockout power. So I don't think she'll have enough to take down Tatiana Suarez. The main event, Damian Maia steps in versus Kamaru Usman, and this is a fight that Usman called for a couple years ago said that he wanted to take out all these ground guys and stomp them and show that he was the best. And so far, that's what Kamaru Usman has shown us. Damian Maia's coming off a couple losses to Colby Covington and Tyron Woodley, and I don't think his streak gets any better. If you've listened to the podcast before, I think Kamaru Usman is the best fighter in this division other than Tyron Woodley. Those two seem to me to be on an absolute collision course. I don't think it's something that's going to anyone's going to step in between that for a while. Obviously, there's an interim title fight going down, so Tyron Woodley's going to have to defend it again before he would have a matchup with Kamaru Usman. So Usman's going to have another fight after this. Nonetheless, these are Damian Maia is the human boa constrictor. He gets on you and you just can't shake him off. But that's where Kamaru Usman's different. He's so strong. He's such an athletic wrestler. Kamaru Usman is just an absolute animal. And I think he wins by TKO, probably in the 4th round. He's going to wear Maia down. And Maia's just not going to be able to do anything with him, as we saw Maia be fairly ineffective lately. And Usman can also outstrike Maia. He's a much better striker. So look for Kamaru Usman to win this fight. So that's all we've got for you this week. Check back with us next week. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on wordpress.savagemmashow.com. You can find us on Twitter at SavageMMAShow. You can follow my personal Instagram at savage_emiddle. Our audio podcast is available on MMApodcast.com. It's available on Stitcher, Podbean, Apple Podcast, iTunes, Google Play Music, and pretty much anywhere else that podcasts are available. We'll see you next week, and until then, stay savage.